Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The regular meeting of the Grosse Ile Township Planning Commission will come to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item is additions and or deletions to the agenda. Does anybody want to change the agenda from that which was proposed? Hearing no suggestions, I'll ask for a motion, please, to accept the agenda as presented.
I move approval.
Motion from Ann, support. Support from Eric. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Agenda stands. Next item is the review and approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of June 20th. Are there any comments on those minutes? Ann?
I have none.
Jody?
No.
Eric?
No.
Jay?
No, sir.
Jim?
No comments.
Okay. Steve? No. Brian?
No.
Entertain a motion, please, to accept the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Motion from Eric, support.
Second.
Jay, support from Jay. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Once again, Lori, nice job. Next item is public comment. Since there's no one in the audience, we'll move past that to the next item, which is a public hearing on zoning ordinance amendments. A little background first. The Planning Commission manages township ordinances, and as a group, our intent is to make sure that these are kept current so that we can best protect the interests of our citizens when new developments or uses are proposed. In early 2011, we identified a number of potential improvements for the zoning ordinance. We put a subcommittee together which consisted now of Jay and Jim, who worked with our planner, Brian, and they put together, from the list of ideas, some concepts which were turned into draft language. Now, these modifications we're talking about are really quite minor, okay, in nature. But they do cover a number of different ordinance sections. There's changes in Article 1, the definitions, Article 7, Macomb Street District, Article 9, Airport and Light Industrial District, Article 17, waterfront provisions, and Article 18, non-conforming lots, structures, and use. At the last Planning Commission meeting, we talked in general about the language, and there was consensus among the Planning Commission that we were ready to move this thing forward into the formal ordinance approval process. So tonight it's on the agenda in order to address. Now the process for changing the ordinances are outlined in Article 25, entitled Amendments to the Zoning Ordinance. The review procedure is specifically set or summarized in Section 25.3, entitled Review Procedures. It's a three-step process. First, we hold a public hearing. Second, the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the Township Board. And then third, the Township Board gives the final approval. Tonight, we're at step one. We're going to hold the public hearing, and I would expect, based on all the pre-work and that's been done on this, the Planning Commission will vote on this tonight to pass a recommendation for the Board. So on that, with that summary, I'll stop and ask Brian to kind of lead us through the concepts of the various sections.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Actually, if it's okay with you and the Commission, I did summarize the ordinance amendments in a brief slideshow. If it's okay, I'm going to go up to the podium.
Sure, have at it. That's great.
My goal was I figured it would be a little easier to follow in terms of the public hearing and for our residents, although none are in attendance this evening. We are on TV, so hopefully this will be
a large population.
Yes. So hopefully there's 10,000 people at home watching us right now. So just real quickly, Mr. Chair, you've already given a great summary. Brief overview. There are 5 sections of your zoning ordinance that are impacted by the proposed amendments. Following this brief presentation, we will need to conduct a formal public hearing, as you've noted. I certainly can go through any additional discussion, question, answers that we may have. And then lastly, provided that this group is ready, then you certainly will be in position to make your recommendation forward to the Township Board. So the very first section is 1.3, which relates to the definitions that are in your zoning ordinance. Two changes that we're proposing. One is we're going to add a definition for a pawn shop. Two, we're going to add a definition for a resale and consignment shop. They are similar uses, although there are a lot of intricacies that make them quite different in many ways. The pawn shop being the exchange of goods on loan, the consignment or resale being more of a second-hand store, being kind of for sale items, or that they will sell them for you, or you get a % of the sale price, etc. So wanted to make sure that we provided the distinction between these particular types of uses and how they differ from just a standard traditional retail use. So we've added in new definitions here. The follow-up to that, of course, is that we've added these two uses as allowable in the Macomb Street district. So the next section of the ordinance, we're dealing with 7.2. This relates to the host of permitted uses in the Macomb Street district. So very first one, we're adding resale and consignment shops as a permitted use in the Macomb Street district. In terms of the pawn shop, we are also adding that. However, both our office and the commission and the subcommittee, I think, all agreed that if we're going to open up the Macomb Street district for this type of a use, we want to make sure that it's done properly. And as such, we've listed it as a special land use, which will require a more formal review and approval process to ensure that if somebody wants to open a pawn shop in this community, they will meet the strict test for location and for operation in terms of your special land use standards. Taking it one step beyond, we've also incorporated a number of operational restrictions that, again, will help this use make sure that it blends in with the community, make sure it's not going to be harmful to surrounding and adjacent land uses. The third item we've added to Macomb Street is what again I've just summarized here as a household tool and equipment rental shop. This also would be a special land use in this district. And again, we've also added, similar to the pawn shop, we've added operational restrictions to make sure that it's going to work and function as we see the Macomb Street district developing and maintaining and operating. Again, we want to make sure we don't have a use that comes in and is out of character with the desired character and the intent of that particular district. So we have a number of restrictions that go with that. The next section is 9.3, and that is the host of allowable uses in the A1 Airport and Light Industrial District. So the very first item we've applied here is we are adding tool and equipment rental as a permitted land use in the A1 district. We've also put forth the idea of allowing a municipal recycling center. Again, this would be as a special land use in the A1 district because of the potential impacts that such a use could have. And we've included a number of operational restrictions, again, with this particular use to make sure that it blends in, make sure it's consistent with the character of that A1 district. The last point here is we've incorporated, actually the A1 district, because it's a little bit different, it incorporates both the airport as well as kind of the Commerce Park, light industrial type area. And given that it encompasses the airport, this is actually one of the rare districts in your ordinance that also has a list of prohibited land uses. Typically, we just have permitted uses that are principal permitted, permitted accessory, and allowable with special land use approval. In the A1 district, we actually go so far as to list a number of uses that are strictly prohibited because of, again, the unique character and the particular aspect of the A1 district that we have a functioning airport sitting within that district. And so what we've added is just a general line item that any uses that could be considered hazardous to airport operation would strictly be prohibited. So again, it's not any more specific. That's a very general idea, but we want to make sure that we're not going to open up this district for anything that's going to interfere with the operation of the airport. Obviously, safety being a main concern here. So again, a general statement, but I think ultimately, if something came forth, we could make a pretty good determination if it was going to have a harmful effect on airport operations. The next item is really just a clarification. Your waterfront provisions, and this time we're dealing with Section 17.4 specifically, which lists all of the allowable uses and structures in waterfront yards. A couple of things that that section does not list are items that are permitted elsewhere in the ordinance in waterfront yards. So rather than being redundant in listing everything in multiple locations, what we've added is a general line item that will make sure that when somebody's looking at the waterfront provisions, they know that they need to reference other sections of the ordinance as well. So for instance, 17.4 makes no mention of a small storage shed. But if you go to detached accessory buildings in 19.11, there is a reference to a small detached storage shed that could be allowed in a waterfront yard if it met setbacks, height, size, etc. So what we've done here is just make sure that there's a reference so that somebody looks at the waterfront provisions, they know there are other sections of the ordinance they also need to look at. And then the last section that we're proposing to amend is 18.6. This relates to non-conforming buildings and structures. The way your ordinance currently lays out, there's a section of conditions where you can have a permitted expansion to a non-conforming building. One of the primary concerns under that section is this quote-unquote 90% rule. You've probably heard us talk about this a lot. It's come forth at ZBA on a number of occasions. What that says is that if you have a building that is not conforming due to, for instance, a side yard setback issue, but if it provides 90% of the required setback, there may be the ability to expand that without having to go forward to the Zoning Board of Appeals. What we intend to do with this section is add in a line item such that your building spacing requirement would also be treated the same way under the 90% rule. Right now it's specific to setback only, but if you recall in your ordinance, you also have an 18-foot separation between principal buildings in the R1A and R1B district. It's come up on occasion. Staff has, once or twice, we've had to make an interpretation whether it fell within this category, whether it did not. So one of the things that we've tried to do is we want to clarify it, make sure that it's in the ordinance, and then we would apply this 90% rule to the spacing requirement as well. So you guys know I'm not good at math on my toes, but whatever 90% of 18 feet is, if you met that, you could potentially qualify as a permitted expansion to that building. If you were below that 90% threshold and you still wanted to pursue an expansion of that building, you'd have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and seek a variance. So again, it's a clarification, but it's sort of an interpretation that staff has made. We think it'll help moving forward. If this situation arises again, then we're in a position where, yes, it's clear. Now it says building spacing and or setback requirement. We know exactly what direction to move forward on. That's the summary, Mr. Chair, so I'd be happy to take any comments or questions you may have. Just a reminder, we do need to conduct a public hearing, albeit there's no public here, but we still need to do that. And then following close of the public hearing, if you're so inclined, you're certainly in position at this point procedurally to put forth a recommendation to the Township Board.
Thank you, Brian. Good summary. What I'd like to do now is, before opening the public hearing, I'd like to have questions and comments from commissioners, get your sense of this. This all, I'm sure, looks familiar to you from past meetings, but let's run through it and see what people think. And I'd like to start with Jay and Jim over here because they were on the subcommittee. Jay, why don't you lead it off?
Sure. If I could ask Brian to once again, I think you alluded to it, but I think it would be helpful to discuss, if not for us, for anybody watching at home, the difference between something being considered a permitted use versus something that falls under special land use, and why it makes a difference that we have one under one category and one in the other category when it comes to retail and the pawn shops.
Yeah, absolutely. The uses that are listed specifically as permitted by right, those are the types of uses that we expect and want to encourage in a given district, whether it's Macomb Street, Airport, even the residential districts. Those are the uses that the district is intended for. So for instance, R1A single-family residential, obviously detached single-family dwellings are permitted by right. That's what we want to encourage. That's the intent of the district. However, there are also uses where the potential where they could fit in with the particular district, but they may or may not. So what we need to do is evaluate those on a little bit grander scale in terms of our review process and make sure that any impacts or potential impacts of that use are not going to be harmful to surrounding properties or the intent of the district. So, for example, if we're talking about, I'm going to go back to my residential district example, a single-family dwelling is permitted by right, a school or a church, which would have traffic implications, potentially infrastructure implications in terms of utilities, those would be special land uses. They are more intense uses, generally a little bit larger uses, and have broader impacts that could be felt district or community-wide. And that's why we put it through kind of the additional scrutiny of another review process, which actually has to go through for public hearing as well. So the nice thing about special land uses is if it is a use that's going to potentially impact a neighbor or even a neighborhood or a district, there's a requirement by state law. We have to notify all property owners within 300 feet of that site that will be holding a public hearing on that particular request. So it's an added level of scrutiny in terms of the review, but also an added level of potential input from the public as well.
Yeah, so whereas a permitted use, an applicant could come to the township, fill out the paperwork, and begin construction and or remodeling of an existing space instantly or virtually
Correct.
instantly. Something requiring a special land use would have to come before the Planning Commission. We would have a chance to review all the plans, depending on the type of use, review such things as the exterior and signage and all sorts of things for the overall impact on the community.
Yeah, everything that goes along with it, yeah. And ultimately, Township Board has the final say on special land uses as well. So it's not only the scrutiny that the Planning Commission gives that particular project, but then again, it gets a second layer of review by the Township Board also.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I thought that would be helpful to understand why it made a difference that one was treated one way and one the other. The other question I hadn't thought about it when we had looked at it previously, but hearing you talk about it, the going to the use is not permitted in the airport, where we added the language about hazardous to the airport operations. I had always read it as being more narrow than what you were describing, because I think we were only talking about 12, right?
Correct.
And so I always read that to just mean something that would attract wildlife or
Correct.
birds, which would be hazardous, not other things which could be hazardous.
That is true. That's a great clarification. Thanks for bringing that up. I was just going with my very quick summary idea. But yeah, it is, that particular proposed amendment is specific to uses that would attract birds or large numbers of wildlife or something. Again, I think the birds being the key one that could have an impact on operations here at the airport.
At the risk of derailing what we're doing here, are we being too narrow? I mean, should we have something more general? I asked that of you and also of the rest of the committee, something just generically that says no operations that would be hazardous to airport operations. I don't know what that might be. And I don't know if it would be overly broad. I hadn't thought about it.
I think we're probably safe at this point. We've kicked this around enough. I feel pretty good about it. Obviously, another use that has the potential to impact airport operations are like cell towers. And I feel comfortable that our regulations on uses such as those would certainly be good enough to cover. And anything that would be a special land use would get, again, that additional review, the additional scrutiny, and it's got to blend in and not be harmful to surrounding land uses. So I feel pretty comfortable on that. And that's not to mention, anything we're talking about strictly local zoning at this point. The FAA comes into play. Anytime we're dealing within a certain radius of the airport, there's the potential for an FAA regulation to kick in as well. So I feel pretty confident. I'm glad you made me bring forth that clarification, but I feel good about it. I don't necessarily know that we need to have a more general comment because I think we're covered by other regulations.
Yeah, it would have to be something that would fall under the permitted uses in the airport district. And
correct.
Presumably, some sort of blasting operation wouldn't. And then hearing you talk about the 90% rule, I mean, do we really have a lot of applications that makes a difference between 18 feet and 16-foot 3, or?
Believe it or
whatever that
not,
would be?
yes.
Yeah?
Yes. You'd be amazed. It's the 90% rule. Your standard residential district is a 6-foot side yard setback,
Right.
which, again, my math, 90% puts it at a 5.4-foot setback in terms of the 90% rule, whatever 4/10 of a foot is, 5 inches, 4.5 inches, 5 inches, whatever it might be. And it's a very fine threshold between those that may or may not qualify under that. We had originally, if we take this all the way back to kind of the initial discussion on some of these ordinance amendments, we'd actually at one point proposed to take that 90% down to like maybe 80 or 75% to kind of open the door for more improvements for non-conforming buildings, but ultimately a decision was made that 90% is a good number. At some point, the difference between a 5.5-foot setback and a 6-foot setback is really not that noticeable in reality. On a plan it is. Certainly a 6-inch discrepancy is big, but if it's your neighbor and the difference between 15-foot and 16-foot or 17-foot and 18-foot on a separation, it's really negligible. But if we were to lower that to, the difference between 10-foot and 18-foot is noticeable. So we stuck with the 90% and think that it could do some good. Ultimately, what would happen is it would be a benefit to somebody who happens to have a non-conforming residence, but that is just a little bit out of compliance, but not a great significant measure.
Okay. Thanks. That's all I wanted to come in.
Thanks, Jay. Jim, you were the other partner on this subcommittee.
We had some great discussions during the subcommittee meetings, and Brian did a good job with capturing a lot of our thoughts, so thank you, Brian. I don't have a whole lot to add. I'm curious what everybody else has to say. So
Okay, well, let's move the direction to the right. Steve, what do you think?
Definitely, I think it's a lot of work has been done. I actually read through this about 3 times just to make sure I had a full understanding of it over the course of the past week, and the time that you put into it is clear to me. Nothing stands out that I think should be recommended to change it any further. I think it addresses everything to the needs of the residents of Grosse Ile, and when people have new ideas or new things, as we see tonight, like to hear the public's input.
Thank you, Steve. Brian?
Well, I believe that it was put together. It's very good, professional. I appreciate all the work that everybody's done on this. I don't really have too many more comments about it, but in one section we talked about the tool rental, and this is just more of a procedural thing for maybe in the future. We talk about making sure that outdoor tools and things that are on display wouldn't block vehicular or pedestrian access. Might be good to include bicycles in the future. And that's all I really have to comment.
Brian, did you...
We could certainly add that, Mr. Chair. The reference Commissioner Pollock's made is on page 10 of your packet. If you look at the middle of the page, line item 20, household tool and equipment rental. And I mentioned earlier there are some operational restrictions. In this case, if you look at item B under number 20, the idea here is that you can't have any type of outdoor display that's going to block a sidewalk, a driveway, etc. And I think what Commissioner Pollock suggested is that we expand pedestrian or vehicular access to probably read pedestrian, bicycle, or vehicular, or motorized or non-motorized. I mean, there's a lot of ways I could phrase it. Certainly, I mean, the intent is still there, but it's not specifically listed out for bicycles.
Okay, well, subcommittee guys, what do you think? Does that sound all right to you? Jim? Jay?
Yeah, I certainly, I would say that to the extent what we have doesn't cover it, it's only because we were thinking that somewhere between pedestrian and vehicular, bicycle would also be covered. But I appreciate the comment that it clarifies, and I think it points out our encouragement of bicycling on the island. So whether we add the word bicycle or we change it to motorized and non-motorized, either way, I think it's helpful.
Okay. Brian, how about how about making that proposed change?
Sure. I think at
Other
least...
thoughts, Brian? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think just in terms of this discussion right now, I probably would lean to motorized, non-motorized in the description, because that's going to cover a broad spectrum. That way we don't have to get into skateboards or scooters, or we don't have to be that specific. So
Sure.
if the commission's okay with that, I think that's probably what I would propose, because then that way it's the broadest generalization we can make in terms of the statement. So
Sound all right to you guys?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me.
Okay, let's go that route then. Brian, any other thoughts?
No, I just want to make sure that my small little change over here doesn't make us open us up for
No.
public hearing.
No, that's what we want to get. You weren't around when we were having these other meetings, so no, we appreciate that input. Thank you.
We're just to clarify, Mr. Chair, as well, we're in position to make minor changes and tweaks to help clarify the intent. What we can't do at this point is make a substantial change or add something new that's not already being proposed and discussed, because we do have a formal public hearing process and a formal adoption process. But changing pedestrian or vehicular to motorized, non-motorized, in my book, it's a clarification. It's a minor edit.
Yeah, I doubt that would make the difference between us having a crowded room of people.
I don't think so. Well, let's go down here. Eric?
Sure, no, I think this is great work by the subcommittee and by Brian and LSL. I've been working this for the better part of a year, actually I think even more than that, so I certainly think it's had the right amount of influence put into it and changes. I'm very happy with it. The one question I do have, and I think I brought this up at the last time we talked about this, was since we are making changes to the Airport Commerce Park area, that this has been reviewed by the Airport Commerce Park Commission.
We did send copies when the public hearing draft was finalized. We forwarded copies to the staff liaisons of both the DDA and the Airport Commerce Park. So I haven't heard anything back. I know we didn't give them a ton of time, but I believe we sent it out. They've had it for at least a week, maybe 10 days, to provide any comments or feedback on it. I sent it right to Derek and right to Carol for the DDA. So my hope was that, again, those people would get it in their hands if they had any questions or concerns. Since DDA is focused on Macomb Street, since Airport Commerce Park is focused on the A1 district, anything they had to add or comment on or questions, we're certainly open to. I would say at this point, I don't necessarily think the lack of any responses so far is anything to be concerned about. What we could do is I could do another outreach effort. If the commission's still comfortable moving forward tonight, I can reach out to those two groups again prior to this being placed in front of the board.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate, just to make sure we dot all our I's and cross all our T's. The next board meeting is the 22nd, and this will not make the agenda.
Yeah, that's
fine.
fine.
I'm pretty sure it won't.
That actually buys us sufficient time, and by that point, by the time we get into a September township board meeting, they will have had it in their hands for over a month.
Okay.
Which I think at that point, again, I don't think any of these changes are so substantial that my hope is, anyway, I can't presume anything, but my hope is that they'll see these as improvements and clarifications and not necessarily take issue with them.
Yeah, that's my expectation as well. I just want to make sure that we've reached out and
Absolutely.
captured their input.
Yeah, along those lines, just briefly, I know the DDA, on which I serve also, we got a copy of it, and the DDA canceled their upcoming meeting from last week shortly after that, so it at least didn't excite any activity from the chair.
All set, Eric?
All set.
Jody?
I think it's great. We put a lot of work into this, and I don't have any changes. So, thank you.
Okay. Ann?
I just have a couple of comments. It's only been recently you hear the porn chop on the television. When the committee was looking at appropriate changes, was there anything new that was really coming up strong as far as what's permitted uses?
Nothing new there. We had a discussion on uses that were not listed. You may even recall, this probably goes back a year plus. we did a training seminar / presentation that Jeff and I did where we talked about some of these specific things and uses that are not currently listed in your ordinance and areas where we felt we could add some new uses as appropriate. And these were the two that they've been popping up elsewhere, at least in other communities, especially the resale consignment shop. I think the economy has a lot to do with that. But we've not really had any formal requests, so to speak. No one has come in and said, I want to do this, what do I need to do? But those were two specific uses, plus, at least in terms of Macomb Street. And then, if you move out to the airport, the recycling center, something that's come up, was a really big thing over in Taylor, where they did a similar operation. So I think we've added, a handful of new uses that were not previously listed. Certainly, we've not, identified everything at this point, and we're always open to. That's why the ordinances, we have to go through a formal process, but it's always open for discussion and debate, and if it's ripe to be amended, then
Well,
we'll do
not
that.
only have you done a good job in adding new things, you've also looked through how related items could be affected. And I think you've come up with a pretty complete job.
That's a very important concept when you're amending ordinances, is you always have to look at the unintended impacts. If you amend one section, there's a distinct possibility you're going to impact 2 or 3 others, and you've got to make sure you don't overlook that. And again, I congratulate the subcommittee, because if you all remember at one time, too, this was the 20 pages we've got this down to, this was like a 90 or 100-page document of amendments. So I think we've done a good job narrowing the focus for this round. There's more to come in the future, but we got to get through this one first.
Thank you, Ed. My comments, again, I think this has been well worked and presented, and I think it's ready to go to the Township Board. So, again, nice work, folks. Great job, and I think this is for the good of the community. So, on that note, we'll stop the discussion with the commissioners, and we'll go to the public hearing. I'll formally open the public hearing on the proposed ordinance changes. Seeing that there's no one in the audience, there will be no comments, so I will entertain a motion to formally close the public hearing.
So moved.
We have a motion from Eric, support?
Second,
Support from
whoever.
Brian? Call the question. All in favor of closing the public hearing, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The public hearing is closed. So let's bring it back now at this point, and I suggest that motion is in order regarding these draft ordinance changes. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we adopt, what is it that we're doing here? We are,
Modifications to zoning ordinance amendments.
right, but we are approving them for submission to the Township Board. Is that what we are doing? Yes. So I move that we approve these changes to the ordinances to recommend them to the Township Board for adoption.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Jody. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Just to chime in, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could we potentially amend the motion, or just make sure that we're including recommendation of approval with the change as discussed to regarding motorized, non-motorized,
Okay.
just so that it's clear?
Jay? Is that all right?
That's what I meant.
Okay, I think that's what Jody did.
That's what I was seconding.
Okay, so we have the approval of the modified zoning ordinance amendments as discussed tonight.
All right.
Motioned and seconded. Further discussion. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We will make a recommendation to the Township Board. I think, Brian, if you could, this is really a great summary you put together on this. Feed some information there to Eric as the findings of fact or copies of this presentation. It will make it very easy when this goes to the Township Board that Eric can present it without difficulty.
Absolutely.
Yeah, per that, I think that if this PowerPoint presentation is included in the board packets, that would be very helpful.
Excellent. And then, of course, making the contact, you need to get confirmation back to Eric regarding the airport management and the DDA.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you'll be fully ready to go. Okay, excellent. Under Chair's report, we'll have a short discussion about the other ordinance changes. Please recall that essentially we've addressed about half of the changes. You know, we didn't want to bite off too much. We have to decide how or what we want to do with respect to these remaining changes, which have not been through our thorough process yet. So that will come up under Chair's report. In the meantime, let's move to the next topic, which is a presentation on the road ends, and it's a presentation from the Road Ends Subcommittee. A little background on this. Over the last several meetings, the topic of road ends, specifically as they relate to road ends ending at the water, has been a bit of a discussion topic. We got into this topic because right now Wayne County owns our roads, and as such also owns the road ends. Well, there have been a number of times when citizens have made requests to Wayne County to deed over this property straight to the citizens, that Wayne County essentially did not follow their process. Okay, and notifications weren't sent to Grosse Ile Township, so essentially the interests of Grosse Ile and Toll weren't identified and potentially protected. So, in looking at this, we thought that we ought to form a subcommittee to actually take a look at this and see what it is that we can do to make sure that the interests of Grosse Ile Township are fully protected and that we're not held hostage to the compliance or lack thereof by Wayne County to their processes. So, to be proactive, we wanted to figure out options as to what we could do, and then make a recommendation to the township board, for them to decide what in fact is the path they want to take. So, to that end, we formed a subcommittee. Jody was the lead on it. Ann was involved. Steve and Jay were also participants, and they worked this issue. And they came back probably 2 meetings ago with a draft summary of basically 3 options that were out there that the subcommittee was looking at. Okay, and they wanted our input, and we gave it to them. But we also further asked that the subcommittee not bring all 3 to us, but to bring all 3 to us, but also to bring us a recommendation. What do they think, since they've been working on this, is the right thing for us to do, and why? Okay, and we talk about it tonight, and see if it's something that we would want to pass on to the township board. So tonight, okay, the goal is we're going to receive a presentation, and we're going to talk about it. And if there is consensus, we'll take a vote on this and see where people's thoughts are on this, and then potentially move this forward to the township board. If there's anything else that we need to do, if there's some kind of a process or anything else that we need to identify that would help the board, we need to talk about that too. I don't know if that's the case. I guess it kind of depends on our decision. So at this point, I'll stop. Okay, I'd like to move to the presentation, hear what's been put together, and then see what the thoughts are of commissioners. I hope that was reasonably clear. Okay, Brian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to come up here again. I've got me addicted to using PowerPoint, so.
Works pretty well, doesn't it?
Hey, well, I shouldn't have said that. There we go. Come back. You've got the technology. We may as well use it, I'll be honest with you. The communities I have, as just a side note, that do have projector and computer systems, this is pretty routine, and I'd like to make that the case here as well, especially when we have plan reviews, because then graphics are so much easier to display and discuss, and we're all looking at the same thing, and we're not trying to point on camera to a setback or something to that effect. So anyway, this will generally become more the norm as we kind of go through. So you've given a great summary, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go through. This is really just what I want to cover tonight. You've already identified the members of the subcommittee who have done all of the work and put all of the time into this. So at some point, once I get through this, I'm going to kind of defer back to them in terms of if I can assist in question and answer, I will absolutely do so. But I think the subcommittee may have more to say on that than I. And of course, subcommittee members, as I go through this, please don't hesitate to stop me if I have any missteps or you need to clarify something, because I'm kind of presenting forth your ideas and your recommendations. They're not necessarily my own, so I just want to make sure that that's clear as well. So what I'm going to cover is just a quick background slide, most of which you've already done, Mr. Chair. I did incorporate the maps of all existing known road ends at the shoreline that are still under Wayne County control. So I do want to take a moment to click through those so you can see exactly where these roads are, and we can always go back and focus on those. Then we're going to hit, you've already noted, the 3 options that the subcommittee developed and then evaluated, and then of course the one preferred option, the recommendation, if you will, that they've put forth, and then obviously wrap it up in terms of any discussion, any action, any next steps that we need to be thinking about. Quick background slide, a few bullet points. I think we've all been through this. You've already noted road ends are unimproved portions of rights-of-way that extend past the physical road. Our focus is really in those situations where they end at the water, at a shoreline. Based on the material that I have from the township, and I've got to update that, there are 17 remaining known road ends under county control that end at the shoreline. There were 18 when this process started, but it came to my attention that the east end, the east road end of Grosio Parkway was abandoned and acquired by the township at some point over this past spring, summer. I'm not exactly sure of the timing, but so we've gone from 18 to 17, but the township acquired it. It was not a private petition to abandon. So the township did acquire that. As you've already noted too, Mr. This has been a topic of discussion for quite some time. I have records in our office that actually date back almost 10 years about abandoning road ends and some discussions that were had, some research that we did at the request of the township board. So this has been out there for a while, and it's certainly an important topic. I think the potential benefits that these things have certainly have kept some legs and some momentum under this particular aspect. A couple of years ago, there was a different subcommittee that was established at the request of the board and the township manager, included board and commission representatives, DPW representatives, consultant team, including our office, as well as your township engineer, C.E. Raines. We all had a number of discussions and tried to identify, discuss, evaluate, research the topic, and put forth a kind of a policy document. And this was, I believe, in 2009. We went through that effort. The administration in the time since requested that the Planning Commission get involved in a more detailed level, that you go through this process again. Part of the request was to evaluate those review guidelines that were developed previously, evaluate them, refine them, put those forward. That was done. So if you'll recall, we went through the subcommittee and through the commission and set forth a recommendation. The Township Board adopted a resolution earlier this year, basically creating a policy and a set of guidelines if the township were to receive a new abandonment request, such that we could then review it accordingly. I've already noted that, and then where we are tonight, we're here to discuss really the topic and the three options, and specifically that recommended third option that the subcommittee has created. So the next few slides are really just maps of these road ends, so you can, number one, graphically, you can really see what we're talking about. You can see here, if we start over left side of your screen, this is Morkland Avenue, and you can see here that it actually continues through and ultimately, in terms of the right-of-way, ends at the thoroughfare canal. So this would be the portion of property, and if it was not built, potentially, Morkland's one, unfortunately, I picked the first one. I'm not that familiar with Morkland or that neighborhood, to be honest, but if you would consider abandonment, my guess is if it's built at all, it probably ends at the east edge of this road here, and then you probably have this entire parcel. Potentially not, but again, this would be the idea of a road end, whether it's that whole stretch from the end of the improved road or whether it's just the piece at the actual shoreline. So there's one there. Right side of the screen, there's another one. And actually, the interesting thing that I found, too, is most of the 17 end at the canal. There are only a couple that actually go all the way to the river, which I found interesting. I don't know if it's anything more than that, but it's something in terms of at least looking through these maps, something that I found. So there's the other one. A few more. Here's one at the bottom of the screen. The east side of Stout Avenue does end at the river. The other two, or actually the other four, on this particular page, covered in two maps. The west side of Stout is a road end at the canal, and then there are multiple up on the north side of the island. There are, you can see on here all the highlights, and three of these are road ends that are still, actually I think, yeah, there's three of them that are still under county control. You'll see the notes on here, such as, if you can follow my cursor, you can't really see it that well on the screen, I see, but this one has already previously been vacated. This one has previously been vacated. This one down here in the middle of the screen is already owned by the township. So just to give you a feel for where these things are, how they exist, and potentially who owns them. So a few more, again, Hale ending at the canal. This is the one here. This was Parkway at the river. That was the 18th. So again, now there are 17 remaining. A few others. Waterman and Chicory are interesting ones because both sides of the platted road end at the canal. So I put the little note up here, kind of times two. So both the east and west sides of the street actually end at the canal. Whether way back when these were platted, if the thought was potentially a bridge crossing or something, I don't know. But at the end of the day, both sides of the road end at the canal. So you dead end from the east, you dead end from the west. Ferry, this is another one on the right side of the screen that actually ends at the river off of Ferry, and then a couple of more. Loma Circle ends at the river. And then the one on the bottom of the screen here, this is a road called River Lane. I believe the entire road is a paper road. I think it's a platted street. I'm not familiar enough to be certain of this, but I don't believe that the road is actually there. So essentially you're dealing with the road end, but potentially an entire right-of-way that is platted. It's a paper street, though. However, there's no improvement there. That's my presumption on that one. So into the three options. We've kind of been through these before, so I'll try to be quick here, and I'll let the subcommittee chime in where needed. Option one is pretty self-explanatory. Don't really make any changes. We have a resolution passed. We made contact with the county requesting improved notification when vacation requests come forth, making sure that they understood the township wanted to evaluate these, and that simply a no response was not an adequate response. I believe their past practice was simply they gave the township 30 days. If they didn't hear anything, they moved forward. What the resolution passed by the board requested was that they make certain that the township got notification and had ample time to review them, so there was no assumption of no interest. Again, this idea of no response was not something that would be acceptable in terms of the future. Obviously, in terms of a benefit, doesn't really require much additional thought. It's the way things are now. We don't really have to do anything different. However, there are inherently some risks to that approach. We're basically sitting around waiting for something to occur. We're also then assuming that the notification process will be carried out accordingly. You mentioned at the outset, Mr. Chair, that there are questions in the past as to whether the township was notified at all. I don't want to go down that path, but certainly there is that risk if we do nothing and if we just continue to allow things the way they have been. Second option was one of really additional review, further evaluation. I think the idea here was that the subcommittee would we've reviewed it in a broad scope. We could now then take a look at those 17 specific sites that are remaining and basically figure out which ones we may or may not want out of those 17. Any that might meet our criteria, that might provide a public benefit, we might want to go after those. There may be others where we simply would have no use for it, it would provide no public benefit, and there's really no interest in moving forward on it. So the idea here was potentially two results under this option. One was that the subcommittee would review, make a list, and either A, specifically, the township could specifically request abandonment of those rights of way or those road ends, or B, the township would have on file a list of the ones that were desirable should petitions come forth, and or even to provide to the county. So the county could have our list and know these are the ones that we're going to want. So it's really a question of, do we go after them now, or do we just know the ones we want and we wait until they come forward? Obviously, the benefits to that are it's certainly a better option than sitting around and waiting because we don't know whether or not the procedures will be followed. We don't know that we'll get good communication back and forth. So this way, we'll know specifically what we're doing. The risk to kind of sitting back and waiting in terms of having a list but not going after them are the same as they were with option one. Again, we're sitting back, we're waiting, don't know if we'll get proper notification, something could slip through the cracks. Option three, and this is the one that was recommended by the subcommittee to bring back before you really for the additional discussion this evening, would be for the township to put forth a request to the county to abandon those remaining 17 road ends. The idea here would be that we would go through that process, would acquire those 17 road ends, and then evaluate those to see what the potential use or non-use would be at that point in time. But that way we don't have to worry about anything slipping through the cracks. There's no miscommunication. There's no lack of notification. It's simply, hey, this is all of them. We would like them. Now let's figure out what we want to do with them. So, in terms of benefits, can act immediately and quickly. It's thorough. You don't run the risk of lack of communication, lack of notification, and then the township will have them in hand, and we can do a thorough analysis of each site to determine really what we want to do with it, if anything. The last line on this slide, the risk to that approach realistically is if we just ask for all of them and get them, we may not want all of them. We may not want all 17. As I mentioned with option 2, there might be 1 or 2 or 3 or whoever knows how many that simply don't fit in with our needs and desires and don't provide any public benefit. And at that point then, it's just adjacent land that the township has acquired with really no use for it. So the concern there would be, we've got it, potentially it's undesirable for us. What do we do with it now? Do we just sit on it? Do we just hang on to it? Do we approach the neighboring property owners, see if they're interested in it? Again, it puts you in a position where you may be stuck with a piece of land that you don't necessarily have any use for. So that's the summary. I think really, where we are tonight is trying to get full commission input on that recommended approach and or on the other two options. If any of the commissioners, off of the subcommittee, or if the subcommittee has had any new discussions or any other thoughts, what those might be. Is there something that's missed? Is there another option that's out there? Do we need more information? Do we need to continue this review, or are we in a position as a full commission that we're prepared to put forth a recommendation or a request into the township board so that they can then move this forward?
Good summary, Brian. Let's take these ideas and discussion topics. Let's move to the committee now. I'd like to start with Jody. Jody, you were the lead on this.
At first I'm much more prudent, and I would have preferred to, look at the ones that we wanted to get first, and then that was but the more I spoke with Steve and Jay, and the more conversation that we all had, the more I came to realize what would be the point of that. I just think it's smarter to go ahead and get all of the road ends and then try to move forward from that. I was under the impression that they could be vacated, even if the township went in. For some reason, in my readings, I thought I saw somewhere where they could be vacated even if the township had them, and I can't remember where. Does anybody else remember that?
Yeah.
So there wouldn't necessarily need to be, what would we do with them? We could vacate them, and that would be fine.
Yeah, no. Mr. If I can chime in, that's the county would have to abandon them for the township to acquire them.
Right.
So that's got to occur. What I was getting at was, what do we do with them? Does it become a park? Does it become open space? Does it just sit? Right. Do we have to maintain it? What is in our grand planning of things? What are we going to do with this piece of property, if anything? So that's all I was trying to get at with that.
Yeah, if I could address Jody's point, because I think it was a critical one for me at least. I don't want to speak for the whole committee, but for me it was critical because I, like Jody, started with the thought, let's not take anything that we might not be able to get rid of. There might, who knows, maybe there's toxic waste on these things that we don't want, to have and won't be able to find anybody to take. So in the course of researching what we understood to be and understand to be the law and how this works, it became important to understand that right now, for any of these, the deed holder on these remains the adjoining landowners. The county, however, has a right-of-way for public use. And so the county has the right to use that property for public use in any way that they see fit, primarily for roadway. That would extend to the water. If the county were to step away from that, it can be its right for the public use can be transferred to another governmental agency. So it would be what we would be requesting is that right be transferred to the township. The township would then have the right to use it for public use. The deed holder would remain the residence. What became critical to my understanding, and I want to make sure that everybody still thinks that's the case, is that we would, if we took ownership of one of these things, or we took the public use right away, we would have the ability to vacate our rights to it and hand it over to the local, to the adjoining landowners directly, and then, our hands are then clean and we have no use of it. And so that was a big change for me, because at the point that I thought we were going to have, kind of deed and ownership and legal obligations and all that sort of thing, and would have to, either sell or get rid of in some other way that property, I was nervous about taking those on. To the extent we can walk away from those ourselves with no continuing legal responsibility for the property, that made a big difference in my mind, and then swayed me towards option number 3, which was, let's just take them all on, we can evaluate them, hand off what we don't want to the adjacent landowners. But we would, that maximized our ability to take the control over those properties to decide at our own pace what we want to do with them. There may be some we want to do something with now, some that we want to do, we've got some ideas. Others we have no idea, and we're going to leave to the Township Board of, 2027 to decide what they want to do with that, but we're preserving those assets for the community. That was critical to mine, and I know some of the comments that I think were on the PowerPoint, and I apologize to Brian, because I think, Brian, you stepped back from the committee to a certain extent, maybe while we were in the midst of that. So that was where we were, some time ago, that those were serious concerns of ours, and only with that greater understanding. And I think you see there was a suggestion there. It probably makes sense to have the township attorney chime in prior to the township board voting on this. But that was our understanding of the law from the research that we did.
Brian actually sent me this presentation, and I didn't catch that at the bottom.
Okay.
I caught the top part, but I didn't. So I don't want him to take responsibility for that, because he did allow me to review it. And wait a minute. So I apologize for that, Brian. But part of our discussion came out. We had Jay's legal opinion and Scott's, but I think it's still very prudent to have the township attorney look at this before we do anything, just to confirm that what we believe is correct. And I think that's important, very important, like Jay said.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Jay, any additional thoughts at the moment?
No, at the moment, I think that was the point I wanted to make, and I think it was critical to, like I said, at least to my decision-making, that we understood it to be that way. And I think Scott Aston, who's not here today, wasn't on the committee, but attended some of our meetings and provided a fair amount of information to us in the form of court opinions and things like that we could research. And some of the information on where these properties are. So I want to thank him for the information that he provided to us. In case anybody's concerned, I didn't think any sort of influence on the committee other than providing valuable information.
Excellent. Let's move to you, Ann. What were your thoughts on the recommendation?
Well, I think we were pretty well agreed that we would want to take all of them and make decisions from that, and that seems to be, to me, as the most practical way, because there are other elements in there other than abandoning it or selling it. And so I think we're on the right track.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you were the fourth member of the team. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the presentation really summed it up. I will echo what Jay said, and I do want to thank Scott Aston. The knowledge that he brought to the table and all the documents really helped with a lot of the clarity to this project. This is a great asset that this community has, and that's out there and it's available right now. You can go and you can use it to access the waterways, and I think that's something that a lot of island residents have been asking for, and this is their opportunity to not say we don't have it. Well, you do have it, and this is a means to bring it to the forefront. I think the three options that we vetted out were very good options and represent a lot of the feelings of the community. I do support the third option, and I think that sums it up best because of that final point where we can acquire the property, and it still is deeded to the homeowners, but we can maintain the access for the island residents, and when we see the time fit to let that area go and our access rights to it, we do it at our discretion, which is a comfort for me.
Okay. Let's go all the way down to you, Brian. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I really appreciate the PowerPoint presentation. It did sum up, a lot of it. And I think that maybe our viewers that might be viewing this online in the future might benefit from that PowerPoint as well. So I didn't know if we might be able to put that online on the website so that way they could download it, take a look at some of the example road ends and things of that nature. But moving into some of my other questions, I was wondering why we only looked at road ends that were adjacent to the water. Is there any road ends on the island where there might be like ending at a park or ending at an unplatted roadway, or things of that nature that might be of benefit to us as well? As well as, well, I'll let that question be answered first, and then I have one follow-up question.
Well, I can answer that from the standpoint that that was the scope of the original subcommittee back in 2009. It was tied to waterfront specifically, and when the request came through from the township board, or Dale Ream, I forgot now exactly who, it was specifically focused on the waterfront. That's not to say that there isn't valuable property in other areas of the island. It's just that in order to accomplish something, we focused on exactly what the request was, and so that's what we've done.
Okay. A follow-up to that, would it be possible to in the future request the if we went through the board or a subcommittee as well, do a similar motion where we're looking for the other properties that don't end at the water, because those could be used for non-motorized access to make connections that could actually shorten the distance for bicyclists and pedestrians trying to get to our downtowns and things of that nature.
The answer to that is certainly yes. However, the process needs to be, I think we need to see what the board thinks about this, as an idea, and see what the board's direction actually is. If they accept the proposal on the waterfront road ends, okay, that sends a signal that, hey, maybe we're moving in the right direction here. If on the other hand they don't like the idea, okay, then it doesn't matter what we do because they're the decision makers. So let's take it one step at a time and see how this first pass comes out, and then we as a group can talk about, is there a step two? Okay.
One last question. I'll echo that. I think that option 3 seems like one of the best options, because again, then we've got the properties in hand and we'll be able to, at our own discretion, figure out what we need to do with them. But I was worried that maybe that possibly opens us up to more political pressure. If, as it's said, that the deed actually lies with the adjoining landowners, then maybe once they find that out, then there'll be more pressure on the township board to relinquish our access to that.
I'd like to discuss that point for a minute. That was something I was going to ask about when it came my turn. But I'm going to jump in on this. I have never seen on a right-of-way where the property owner owns the property. That only applies to an easement. This is a right-of-way. The property belongs to Wayne County. It does not belong to the citizens that are adjacent. Am I correct on that? I know I'm correct.
That's my understanding.
This is the way a right-of-way works. The citizens do not, the individual citizens, you don't own half of your street, okay? You only own up to the edge of your property line. The right-of-way is owned by by Wayne County, okay? The same thing applies to the right-of-way. So the only way that citizens actually would be deeded that property is if they requested it, Wayne County abandoned it, Grill Seal abandoned it, then the property would be split and the deeds would be changed on the adjacent property owners. But right now, those road ends, the 17 or whatever that are out there, are public property. Anybody disagree with that?
How could we?
Well, I don't know what to say about that. Well, anyway. Okay, you got me. But it's a difference between an easement and a right-of-way. An easement, like a utility company comes through and you have an easement for a power line, okay? They don't own the property, you do. Okay, but they have the right to put their power line across it. Okay? That's the difference.
Yeah. In either case, this might bring up news and put more pressure on the council to relinquish control if we did have, access to that property. So while I definitely think that option 3 is the best, I think of some of the risk that might be involved with that, is where right now we sort of have that buffer that, Wayne County's the one that actually owns the...
Yeah, comment on that, please,
Can I
Jody.
comment on that? Because my biggest concern was that people would get upset and feel that, they weren't included in the process, they didn't know, and that I'm very adamant that the process be very transparent, and that if anybody wants to voice, and we had a couple suggestions from one of our meetings that, we could make another agenda item on to discuss the road ends proposed that we plan to transfer and allow public time to give input. We also talked about putting it on our website, what you just suggested, Brian. We did talk about that. My suggestion is that you have a committee that's outside of the scope of the Planning Commission that includes community members and other commissions, because this impacts the whole island. It's not to me. It needs to be very transparent and open, and it needs to include, I think, personally, other representatives of the community than just the Planning Commission. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's the way I see it. And transparency is very, very key. So whatever we can do to be open and upfront of this, that's my personal thing. That's we talked about that in one of our meetings, specifically.
Most definitely. I mean, we need to make sure that everything is open and transparent and involve the public at large. Again, it was just me thinking out loud and thinking of different options where, excuse me, I'm losing my train of thought here. But, so it's like perhaps we have a road end that we feel is in the public interest, but it's not something that we'll be doing in any time in the near future with developing it because the township doesn't have the funds, it's not the right time for this. But maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road, as far as the master plan is concerned, the recreation master plan, or any other township plan, that property might be decent for that use in the future. How are we thinking about any controls to make sure that there's, the political nature of today doesn't degrade the future use of that land?
And we can't avoid this issue because it may be political. I mean, that's part of the problem. You can't just say, well, we're not going to do anything because it's going to open up a hornet's nest. I mean, I think that was the decision that we had in our committee.
Well, and you're right. And we're also kind of debating something that any one of us could walk out right now and access the water via any of these road ends. There's nothing stopping you. You have the right to do that right now. You have the right to wake up tomorrow and do that same thing and go fishing or put your kayak in. You have that right now. That's something to keep in mind. So be it whatever we discuss, you can wake up tomorrow and do that at these 17, 18 numbered road ends.
Yeah, in fact, we discussed the fact that we thought that this process alone was a public service in the sense that there's a great misunderstanding of what road ends are. We see a few of them that we know are county right-of-way that have no trespassing signs on them. And the fact is that those residents cannot prohibit other residents from accessing the water through that property. Maybe, exactly where the right-of-way ends and the homeowner's property ends, can be open for question, but the fact is that there's a great misunderstanding. Now, whether those homeowners don't understand the rules or if they do understand the rules and want to discourage people anyway, I don't know. But I do know that most residents don't understand the fact that they have this access, and so just going through this, our role shouldn't be to hide the fact that what the way this works, and the fact that we publicize it may cause some disputes or it may cause some people who are upset with how things are treated. But the fact is there's a great misunderstanding of what these properties are.
Jim, what do you think?
I appreciate what the subcommittee's done thus far. Obviously, this is a presentation. The details weren't in our package up until this point in time. I knew the basis behind the discussions and the options, but I think a lot's been discussed tonight. I would like some time to think about it. What are the next steps typically after a discussion like this? Would we come back at next meeting and have it on the agenda with more detail? And
yeah, there really isn't any ordinance process for this. This is strictly us looking at an issue at the request of the board. And so it's pretty much, whenever we have a consensus to move it forward, you know.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right now, if you look at option number 1, it's exactly what we have right now.
Yeah.
The ordinance is in effect, or the policy is in effect for the township board. So what that dictates is that anytime Wayne County is going to ban this and they come to the township board must take action in a public meeting. So the township board must either say, yes, we want this, or no, we don't want this in a public meeting. So before, maybe this may have happened administratively or some other way. So right now, we're fairly well protected. What the board has asked is that, okay, so we've got the stopgap measure right now of coming to us, but what are the other potential implications of the rest of the properties? So the township, I mean, this commission can come back and say any one of a number of things, including the 3 options that are outlined. Or we may just say, hey, township board, this is our report right now. This is kind of the status where we're at. Do you want us to go further, or do you not want us to go further?
Okay. After today, are we deciding something today, or are we?
It's up to you guys. It's whatever the majority of the commission wants. It's
Okay.
we will handle it however people feel comfortable.
Well, there was one suggestion that we review it with the attorney. The other one, I was just wondering whether we couldn't use that map that we used for the yard sale. If we couldn't use that map and put the locations on there of where these road ends are, you get a different picture than the one you showed on the tel. So they have, it's about a 17-inch map and quite clear. And if that would give us a better perspective of what we're really talking about, and then whether the idea would go forward based on an attorney's opinion.
Those are good suggestions.
Thank you.
We'll take them down.
But it just gives you a different picture than the...
Well, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to see on
Yes, yeah.
subsections from the plat map, that's for sure.
Yeah, and they have a good-sized map for that, so...
Other thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do have one other thing if Jim is done. And that is, this is predicated on something that I'm not sure any one of us know, but right now we're predicating this on the fact that practice has it that Wayne County first comes to the township, gives the township first right of refusal whether we want it or not, and then they go to the individual citizen or the adjoining property owners. And I don't know if that's a state law that makes them do that, or if that's a Wayne County policy that makes them do that, or if that's just a practice that they're operating under. So I think if we better understood what what's the mode of operation for Wayne County on how they follow the abandonment policy, I think that helps us out a tremendous amount and lets us know really where we feel or where we stand. Because I think everyone's base assumption, maybe I'm wrong on this, is that it's basically the law that they have to come to us first. And I don't know if that's the case or not. And I would like to understand that question.
My assumption was they come to you if they have the desire, if somebody doesn't come to them first, or that they really don't even get their own process.
Yeah, well,
that was what our concern was.
Well, that's the thing. Is it a process or is it a law that they're following for this? I suspect it's a law, but I don't know.
Do you think Dale Ream could clarify that, or no?
Well, I think Dale or Bill Look should be able to get that clarified.
Okay, so we have a suggestion about the Wayne County mode of operation, relative to the law. We have the attorney's opinion on taking over the property, so that can go to the same time. We have a suggestion about an improved map presentation format, something more visual, particularly if this goes to the board. You can't show it in 17 pieces.
Yeah, right, no.
So...
And then the final thing I'd like to bring up
That should show up very well on that map.
Just to keep in mind that the township gets the property. Just say right now the township went out and said, you know what, every single piece we're going to get Wayne County to abandon and we're going to control it. Right? That may be better or that may be worse than having this in Wayne County control. Right? Some future board may say, hey, we need to raise this money for a lawsuit or whatever, so we're just going to sell this all off. So be careful what you ask for, and
Yeah, right.
and just going out and carte blanche acquiring all this. Maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not, right? But I don't think this board can necessarily know all of that.
Then are you suggesting maybe that the attorney confirm how future boards may be able to handle that property? Because that's the suggestion I'm getting out of that, so, which is a good one. I mean, because you're right. You don't want 20 years from now, well, we need this and we're going to sell it. And so could the attorney do that, do you think? Is that a...
I think that's really kind of a board decision. I think the best thing to do for us is to kind of clearly outline what the facts are to the board and let them make the decision. And to me, the most important one is clearly identifying what process Wayne County is following. And if tomorrow, what would allow them to change that process tomorrow without our knowledge?
Yeah, I think to that point, Eric, I think it's a fairly known answer, isn't it? If it's in general fund property, a future board can do whatever they want with it.
Unless there's a deed restriction or some other
Right.
mechanism placed on it at the time of
Right.
transfer.
Right, or if at the time of acquisition it goes into open space.
Correct.
Right, it'd be one or the other. Otherwise, it's free game.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess that being said, I'd like to have, all the questions that John had listed out there answered, kind of summarized in this report, and then, maybe we figure out what goes on from there. But it may just be that this report is the outcome for the board.
Now, do you think we should wait on something like a map? I mean, I think it'd be beneficial for the township residents to see a map on the website that shows what's available to them today.
I think, again, I think that's something outside the purview of what we're looking at right now. I mean, and there's two issues with that. Number one is we're assuming that Wayne County is going to allow people to use these, right? Wayne County may have a policy that if there's no road on it, they don't want the liability, so they're gonna post it no trespassing. I don't know. I mean, right now we assume that Wayne County, since they own it, they let everyone use it carte blanche. It's public property. Maybe true, maybe not. But I think once we start putting maps up and starting the hornet's nest, then we really should know the answer to that before we start doing that.
How do we answer that question?
I thought that was clear that but I couldn't, I couldn't swear to it, but I thought it was clear from our discussions with Scott that they were open for public use. But that was the implication that I had.
I suspect you're correct.
Right,
But
but you
you
just
have
wanted
a
to
township
confirm.
attorney weigh in on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
You know what the word assume means, right?
I understand that. I understand that, but I was from and I appreciate the suggestion, but we did discuss those things, and that's one of the reasons we want the attorney to review this. We don't want to be
Right.
in a situation like that.
Right, especially if we're making a recommendation to the township board, that we need to make sure we've got all our background correct.
I also thought one of the, I don't know if it's an ordinance or which part of the township code, it states that if you want to access a road end, you have to come before the township board and ask for approval, ask for permission. I believe that's in the township code. So that may be something too, where, maybe the township lawyer has already given a ruling years ago in order for that to become a code, because
Could very well be.
it's
Especially if it's a code. You're
it's
right.
in the township code that you come before the board and ask for permission.
Okay, so there are a number of questions that have come out on this that primarily are exclusively directed to the attorney. First, we had the question of liability. Okay, that was one that was in the report. That if we get it, what are there any implications of that? Okay, we had questions centered around Wayne County. What is their mode of operation? Are they doing this trickle down by law? Are they doing it by just because they're nice guys, or is there some just general practice? What is that? And that's a legal question. We also had a question about Wayne County, in terms of what are their restrictions on those road ends right now. Is the assumption that they are public, in fact, true, in terms of any use, any time? Don't know. Then there were some questions, centered around the township. Okay, there was a comment about the fact that, if the township gets this property, what, if any, restrictions would there be on future boards in terms of how they handle that property? Are there any? Or is it simply open, as I think, Eric, you suggested, that, it could be sold? Or, are there any restrictions? And so that would be a question for the lawyer as well. The last one is making sure that we understand what the restrictions are on township-owned road ends. On ones that we do own, okay, what are our own what's in our municipal code, basically, is what it boils down to. And how does that impact any of our discussion? So it's one, liability, two, Wayne County, and two, dealing with township. Those are the questions that I've captured. Did I get those correctly? Okay, well, just a couple of thoughts for me. I definitely like the idea of option 3. Intuitively, it makes the most sense to me. If you could control your own destiny and cut out Wayne County, I think you're going to be better off. The other part of option 3, I'm not so sure about. The need to do a detailed assessment now on what you keep and what you want to give away or vacate. Okay, that to me is something that's need created. For example, who can say? I think Jay raised the point. What's going to happen in 2025? I don't know. Okay, but if the township owns the property and somebody comes in with a good idea, whether it's from one of our commissions or whether it's from the citizen wanting the property or who knows where, okay, at that point in time, that specific piece of property gets evaluated against the need, okay, and then a judgment is made that's in the best interest of the community. So rather than trying to guess now what this would be, okay, take the ownership, hold it, and let things evolve, okay? And I think that's a cleaner way of thinking about it. Because, in fact, it's really not any different than what would happen now if Wayne County actually did what they were supposed to do and notified us. The thing of it is, with Wayne County, we only have the 30 days. Eric hit the nail on the head. It's a public meeting, okay, which means it's got to fit in the schedule. How much of an assessment can you do in 30 days? Not much, okay? But if it's township-owned and that same question comes up, okay, now the community has the opportunity to say, hey, look, I want to get planning commission input, or I want the rec committee, or I want open space. I don't know, okay?
Right.
You've got plenty of time in order to process it because, again, you've got complete control. Now, the downside on this, okay, I can remember one time, a piece of property was being evaluated, and, we went out and did an inspection on it, because you always go out and look at the property. Well, what was sitting there? Somebody had left 2 drums of hazardous waste. Okay, some nighttime criminal didn't want to pay the cost. Okay, and it turns out it was a church that eventually had to pay to dispose of something because they were the victims of a crime. And I would want to make sure, that the property at least received a visual inspection. You don't have to do, your point about toxic waste, okay? You don't have to go out and do soil samples and all that stuff, okay? Because we know the history of this place, okay? But you don't know what happened at midnight, last week, when somebody pulled up with a truck. So you go out and you look at these things and make an evaluation, high-level evaluation. Is there anything here that would cause cost or liability to the township? So if you do that, to kind of clear that hurdle, take control of the property, and then evaluate that property based on need, whenever that need finally arises. That's the thought that, you know, that I have on this. So it's a variation kind of on your step 3, but fundamentally, the
Right.
core is the same.
Right.
Get control of the property.
Right.
I don't know. That was just my thinking on it. So,
Do you want us to draw another option then?
well, I don't know. What do people think about that idea? I mean, is that something?
Well, I'm just saying that it sounds like another suggestion. It could be another option. It could give other people another direction to go in if they're not comfortable with having to rush through and you know.
I think you just put more definition behind option number 3, and you give
Okay.
some set of criteria for the township. I mean, if you just say, take all this stuff, you got to give the township some kind of criteria on how they can dispose of the property, right? Especially from a planning standpoint, if the township just, on a whim sells a piece of property, and from a planning standpoint, that was critical for infrastructure, for, bringing power cable or water cable or something like that over, we need to give the township board some kind of guidance on how they can dispose of these properties. Because these are critical infrastructure properties. Could be critical infrastructure
Sure they could.
properties.
Absolutely, they could.
The only thing, you have to take ownership before you can do any evaluation.
Correct.
Jay?
And your evaluation time doesn't have to be the minute you get it.
Yeah, I agree with Eric's point in building on what we talked about sooner, or we talked about earlier. We may want to consider whether we would want to make in our proposal that the township board, at the time that these are received, place some sort of deed restriction against it. I think we have to weigh the benefit of putting some sort of deed restriction that has to be for public use, and the benefit of that versus the downside of this township board may turn down the whole proposal if they think they're being asked to handcuff themselves or a future board. I don't know. I don't want to get in their head too much, but I think that's something we have to weigh, and maybe that's an option that's presented. To Eric's point, that we may end up harming the public use of these road ends by placing it in the hands of a future board that may need to find revenue somewhere. Not that the county wouldn't have to do that, but I think we might need to consider the fact that we've seen, for reasons that we don't need to get into now, but we've seen recently the township board sell properties that people didn't think were going to be sold for reasons that some supported and some didn't, and would we be adding these to the potential pot of those that might be disposed of in the future? So I don't know. I'm not answering. I'm asking the question whether we think that it would make sense that we include in our proposal option 3, that when these are taken, the township board would automatically place a deed restriction against them at the time that they take them.
Well, I think that certainly raises a bunch of questions, and exactly what kind of deed restriction becomes, because, it's right. While, in the end, you have to assume that the elected officials, whether it's now or 2025, are going to be responsible, okay? And I don't know that you could, I don't know. Now, I guess what I'd like to see is have the subcommittee kind of, we'll get these opinions, okay? Incorporate these opinions with the thoughts that you've got, okay, on deed restrictions, on some of the things I suggested, and perhaps modify, expand more detail on option 3, and see, when we bring that forward, we'll bring that forward in the next meeting. Brian, maybe your presentation would incorporate these facts, and it could be made make the presentation not only suitable for us as an audience, but for a township board who's sitting there asking these questions like Eric is asking. Let's put the answers in here. Well, if we don't have answers, what the questions are, okay, so we can talk about it. What do you think, Jody?
That's fine with me.
Does that work for your team?
Yeah.
Ray?
Yeah, I think so. And I think on that.
Steve?
No, I think it's good. I was actually thinking on that last Grosse Hill Parkway, did the board have any deed restrictions on that? And I don't know the answer, I don't know, Eric, if you remember if anything was put on there, or...
No, I don't think there were any deed restrictions on it. We just assumed control of the property. And the question that was asked earlier, so does that mean that we assume the deed to that property, X feet by X feet by X feet? I think the answer is yes, and it would be nice to find that out.
So did Township lawyer review that then before this one, or is this a new process we're looking to implement, having the Township lawyer review?
Well, this would be a new process because that action's already done, right? It's in place. Now, certainly, someone could come to the Township Board or the Township Board itself can take the action and say, hey, you just acquired that, how are you going to protect it?
Yeah, I think the deed restriction question really falls more into the policy question than the planning question. And
I think so too. I think that's where it gets. Well, actually, I take it back. It's a little gray, right? Because you need to make sure that whatever board is, if they're going to disposition this property, that they're fully aware of, 100 years down the road, what kind of consequences it could have as far as providing access or gaining access to it from the water. And I think it's important that you make that known to the board. And I think that's where the planning aspect of this comes in to the policy aspect of it. So that's where it's a little bit gray.
Well, let me ask for clarification of what you're suggesting. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, please proceed. This is a good discussion.
Are you suggesting that we would do a review on a property-by-property basis to determine what the future needs might be and why it's a critical infrastructure point or it's not, or rely more on what we put together previously of these are the steps that should be evaluated in determining what we do with it? It would seem to me that would be a more logical way to approach it, since the needs 50 years from now might be different than what we identify today. And if we say there's no infrastructure need today, 50 years ago that might not be the case, and I wouldn't want anybody to rely on what we think it is today.
Right, yeah. So maybe the guidelines are more important at that point in time. The question is, how do you keep those guidelines 50 years from now?
That's right.
Well, aren't they public officials that are elected, and don't they have some, don't they have to somewhat be accountable to the constituents? And if the constituents don't want that, you can't police everyone, and there has to be some other mechanism that prevents them from doing insane things for the community, I would say.
Ideally, some future board, if they're forced or, if they're investigating getting rid of these properties, they would pass it by the planning commission. But you never know who's going to, what minds are going to prevail at that point in time.
I guess
that's playing, right? It's a lot of what ifs, and you got to protect for as many what ifs as you can.
I guess you can't. To me, it frightens me to try to limit myself back because of the possibility of 50 years from now.
And that is the danger of deed restrictions. And in reality, the township can go and without any deed restrictions, without anything, they can do exactly what happened at the end of Parkway. Okay, except the township initiates it instead of Wayne County.
Right.
Okay, so they could acquire that property and turn around and sell it tomorrow, if that were their intent. Mm-hmm. Okay, but I guarantee that would be
political suicide.
That would
Actually, that's brings up another question, right? So, could they do that? Do the ordinances allow you to sell just a waterfront parcel on one side of the road without selling it on the other side? I think the answer is no.
Yeah, right now, the answer is no, but the reality is there are a number of places around the island where that already exists. And, maybe instead of simply being a vacation, where it's vacated to half going to one property owner and half going to the other, hey, we'll have a sale. Okay? Here's 60 feet of waterfront. Okay? I will sell you 30 for X dollars.
And don't forget, these are the same people that can change the ordinances.
That's true, too.
So yeah, it could be a revenue.
That's a long process. So maybe a lot of this is a moot discussion, but you got to be kind of thinking in these terms, right?
Yeah, I would like to, if the committee could just think about this and think about the implications of this, either one way or the other, kind of like what you did. here's an idea for a deed restriction, what are the pros and what are the cons, okay? And see what it is in the end that makes sense. You know, reconciling with the fact that, okay, whether you like it or whether you don't like it, the township board runs this community, okay? They run this community, not the planning commission, not any other commission around here, okay? And so, you know, we have to defer to, in the end, their judgment. We put ordinances in place, that's fine, but in the end, it's up to the township board to deal with it. So, whoever that is.
Whoever it is, right?
Yeah, whenever it is. So, anyway, okay, so Jody, you and your commission can get together?
John, I won't be able to do that moving forward, because this is my last meeting, so.
Okay, yeah, I was going to announce that on the chair's report.
So, I just don't want to, have any...
Okay, well, so there'll be...
No, I bought a house in Wyandotte. So I'm moving.
And you and Steve and Jay, okay. Would there like to be another volunteer to work on this?
Yeah, Steve's good.
Oh, wait a minute, can we? If you're not on, okay.
Yeah, that brings
What about, that takes us to 7, so we can only have 3 on the subcommittee, correct, Ann?
It should be 3 or 5, but not even numbers.
Okay, well,
Not even numbers.
with Jody moving on, okay, we'll be down to
3.
3, and 3 is exactly what we would have. Okay, so that you guys are it. Okay, who's going to take the lead on this?
That's what Jay did talk to us.
Jay, you want to take the lead?
I'll take the lead, sure.
Okay, all right. So, in terms of getting this defined, okay, this has got to be well summarized, okay? The legal questions and all this has got to be summarized, and definitely would like you to take the legal questions, documented to Bill Rook, okay? And with the answers coming back to the subcommittee and to me, okay? And then you guys can incorporate that in your thinking, and we can move this along and maybe get ready for the next meeting. I'm thinking the next meeting is going to be in October. Maybe the 3rd week in October, so that's a couple months. Okay, that's quite a bit of time. What do you think? Is that going to work for you? Steve?
No, that works. One quick question. Is it, again, I just don't know the process, is it okay for us to put together some questions for the township attorney and spend those funds, or no?
If you have additional questions for the attorney, okay, and your subcommittee thinks that they're, collectively they're relevant questions, then send them to the attorney. You're authorized to do that. Okay? Yeah, as long as Jay is the vice chair, and he can do that. Okay, not each one of you individually, but the subcommittee, make your questions, get them together, make sure they're relevant, okay, and then forward them on.
Could I just try to go through Dale, shouldn't it?
I don't know, we've asked for attorney opinions before.
What I was going to suggest, Mr. Chair, was
it doesn't matter to me.
we have a list of questions already. If the subcommittee has anything additional, I think it's probably the best, most efficient use of time if we have a complete list to send forth, as opposed to sending him these first 5 questions that we have tonight, and then following up 2 weeks later with another 1 or 2. My thought would be it's best if we can get them all at one time.
Okay, that's a great point, too.
So, and my intent is to take what we've asked tonight, and as Eric suggested, I'm going to work this back through Dale as a township manager.
That's fine, too.
So I guess what I would request personally would help me, and I think it would help the process, is if maybe, this is a lot to ask, but in the next week or two, if the subcommittee could get together, and if you do have additional questions, opinions, clarifications that you would like to seek, send those back, to me. I'll compile one complete list, send it to Dale. Dale can then make the request of Mr. Luck, if that's a fair approach.
Sure.
Yeah, we can agree to that.
No,
I think that's fine, just didn't want to overstep our bounds with legal fees and where we are with our financial.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's why I think it's relevant to go through Dale.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, so we've defined the questions. Okay, I think Brian, or I don't know whether one of you guys, you or Jim, talked about the path forward. I think we've got a path forward now. Okay, we've, I think we're starting to come to a consensus, and I think getting the answers to these questions and having a little more subcommittee work, I think will nail this thing down. So I think this was good. This was a good discussion
I
tonight.
do too. I thank you for all your input because it was very, very important. It's very helpful to get everybody's input, for sure. So thank you.
It was our pleasure to help the subcommittee. Okay. So, Brian, you perfectly clear? Absolutely. Okay. Then we'll move on to the chair's report. It is a couple of things here. You have a package, and Brian, I'm going to take it back from what I said earlier. You have a package in front of you from a citizen who has an issue with the manner in which our pool ordinances are defined, and was requesting some changes. Okay, and in that is are pictures of a neighbor and their pool, and essentially the changes reflect what it is the neighbor does not like about the pool. Okay, and this is perfectly fine. Citizen input into ordinance changes is a good thing. So we're going to need to process this along with potentially the other dozen or so ordinance changes that we had not worked. Okay. Remember that back when we started this process, we also had about it was so long and so complicated that we basically took half of the ordinances and worked those, and the other half we left as concepts. Well, actually, a little more than concepts. But we also said in one of our meetings, Eric, that we said we didn't want to advance anything further, anything new, okay, and this falls in the category of new, without having a complete understanding of what the cost was going to be, to make sure that we were managing the money on this as well. So, Brian, that falls on you. Okay? You have the list that we had, and you know where we left off. Okay? How exactly you quoted, your support for this, I'd like you to work out with Dale. You're going to be talking with him anyway. What is it in a quotation format that would meet both your requirements, okay, for a clear definition, as well as the township's requirements for clear money management? Okay? I'd like you to work that with Dale, submit a formal quote with a copy to me, Ann, and Jay. Okay? And then the officers will talk about this. Well, Eric, obviously. Okay? I'm taking you for granted, Eric, because Eric, as our liaison, gets all of this stuff. So, okay, we will discuss it, okay, and decide perhaps at the next meeting as an agenda topic moving forward what to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes great sense.
Okay. And what I'd like to do is have you add, actually there were two items. This one that came tonight about the pool, add that to the list, okay, and add the one that was raised relative to the definition of a personal watercraft. Remember that issue that came up last meeting? Okay. Add that as well, and make reasonable assumptions about how we're going to how we're going to be able to efficiently move through this. Okay, when you quote. Is that going to work for you, Brian? Is that something? Am I asking something that's practical?
No, it's perfect. It's the process we discussed already.
Okay.
I absolutely on board.
All right. So everybody see where we're going on this? Okay. You guys weren't around at the time, but it probably ties the planning commission work to actual formal money management, which of course is top drawer priority for the township board. So we won't proceed unless we all agree that, number one, we've got the money, and number two, it's worth it. Okay? All right. So, I guess the last thing is the next meeting date. And I guess I would suggest at this point, given that we don't have anything firm on the agenda to come, and it's that lot split that we were discussing may or may not actually ever occur.
Yeah, that's, Mr. Chair, I do expect that to be submitted, but unfortunately, at this point in time, I don't know the timing. So
Okay.
I can follow up with that petitioner and try to give you an update. We do also we actually just got a new submittal in within the past week for a request for a larger detached accessory building than is otherwise permitted. Those types of projects we've only seen one, I think, in about 6 or 7 years. But those are processed essentially as special land uses through the Planning Commission. So we do have one application in right now.
All right, well, my preference in order to tie this to the work of the subcommittee is an October meeting, maybe the third Monday in October. I don't know what that date is. You guys with the calendar? What, 17th?
The 17th.
October 17th.
Mr. Chair, I know I won't be able to make that.
Okay, is there a third Monday in October?
A first Monday, you mean?
Well, I can't make it the first Monday if you guys meet.
The third is the 18th.
We would need a fifth Monday, actually.
We got a fifth Monday in.
The 31st?
Oh, no, wait a minute, that's Halloween.
Oh, can't do that. Okay, well, I'd say let's, Ryan,
What about the last meeting in September?
you're out on the 17th? Okay, let's move back into October, into September. What's the third Monday in September?
19th.
Okay,
September what?
September 19th. Jay, that you and your subcommittee will have to really get busy.
I think it'll be Mr. Buck that will have to get this.
Well, if we've already got 2 action items, or potentially 2 action items, then maybe the subcommittee would, we wouldn't meet with them until the meeting after the 19th.
Well, that's a good point, too, because we may, in fact, be busy with business.
Yeah, I mean, if there's actual building out there, I'd like to get it. I'd like to get it revisited later.
That'll be clear to go to the top of the list. Okay, then let's target for September the 19th. And we'll see if these both applications materialize. And maybe we'll get to road ends and maybe we won't. If you guys are ready, we'll talk about it. If not, we won't. Okay, that completes the chair's report. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that they'd like to talk about? Okay, then I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
were you going to say something about Jody?
Oh, yes, absolutely I was. Oh, my goodness gracious. Oh, yes. Yeah. Actually, Jody informed me by email a couple of days ago that this was going to be her last meeting with us, and that she'll be moving on to other things. And so actually, before we adjourn, let's have another motion, okay? Typically, we do this after the person has already left, and it's always a shame, okay? I like a motion. I've really appreciated having Jody on the commission. How many years have you been with us?
I think around 06, somewhere around October. So it's been a few years.
4 or 5 years. I know you've been a real fixture down here on the left side of the table for sure. And it's definitely been a pleasure having you work with us.
Thank you.
It's been fun.
I've enjoyed it. It's always nice to be part of the community. That part I'll really miss, is being part of the community and making a difference in any way. So small, though it may be, it's still making a difference, and I appreciate that. And it's been great working with everybody. Everybody's wonderful. So good luck. Good luck, road and subcommittee.
Okay, on that note, I would entertain a motion, please, to thank Jody for her years of service on the Planning Commission and to wish her well in the future.
So moved.
Motion?
Second.
Second from everybody. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Jody, best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I'd like a motion, please, to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion and support. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.